Hi, welcome to this video. I don't know if I should call this a video because you can't see me. It's just an audio uploaded on YouTube. But still, today or tonight or this evening or whatever time you're listening to this, I want to read to you the first chapter of one of my favorite books ever, which is Percy Jackson and the Olympians, Book 1, The Lightning Thief. Why did I choose this book? Well, this book made basically my childhood. It is my childhood. Like, I know a ton of kids are like, Harry Potter made my childhood. As much as I love Harry Potter, my childhood was... Well, basically, if you look back at my childhood, since like 4th grade, 5th grade, my whole personality was liking Percy Jackson. And I was in 4th, 5th grade a long time ago. So internet was accessible, yeah, but I'm not at all. But it was not that accessible, especially for a child. My parents, we had one computer with access on the internet in the house, and they didn't want me to go on certain websites, obviously, but they only allowed me to go on certain websites. So, and also I didn't know English. So finding a community of people that liked this book when I was a child was really hard. I didn't find one. The first person that I befriended that liked Percy Jackson was a guy that I met through theater in first year high school, so like 9th grade. So 4 or 5 years later. So yeah, also I didn't have, there was no such thing as merch. Well, maybe there was on like eBay, but yeah, basically it was really hard to find people that liked Percy Jackson and people that, you know, felt like me towards these books. And because I really enjoyed these books, I found myself in these books, I found myself immersed in this universe, and I found that I related to these characters a lot. But, you know, I am rambling and, well, I'm rambling. So let's get to the point of this video, that is reading the book. Well, obviously I think also for legal reasons and for time reasons I can't read the entire book. I am going to read the first chapter of the first book of the Percy Jackson series, which is also the first book of the whole Riordan verse, which is huge and, you know, iconic. So maybe there's going to be a series of me reading the first chapter of books, and maybe this series of me reading the first chapter of certain books will intrigue you to read the entire book, and maybe you will fall in love with a new book or a new series. So yeah, let's get to chapter 1 of Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief. I accidentally vaporized my pre-algebra teacher. Look, I didn't want to be an half-blood. If you're reading this because you think you might be one, my advice is close this book right now. Believe whatever lie your mama or dad told you about your birth and try to lead a normal life. Being a half-blood is dangerous. It's scary. Most of the time, it gets you killed in painful, nasty ways. If you're a normal kid, reading this because you think it's fiction, great, read on. I envy you for being able to believe that none of this ever happened. But if you recognize yourself in these pages, if you feel something stirring inside you, stop reading immediately. You might be one of us. And once you know that, it's only a matter of time before they sense it too and they'll come for you. Don't say I didn't warn you. My name is Percy Jackson. I'm 12 years old. Until a few months ago, I was a boarding student at Yancey Academy, a private school for troubled kids in upstate New York. Am I a trouble kid? Yeah, you could say that. I could start at any point in my short, miserable life to prove it. But things really started going bad last May when our 6th grade class took a field trip to Manhattan. 28 mental case kids and 2 teachers on a yellow school bus, heading to the Metropolitan Museum of Art to look at ancient Greek and Roman stuff. I know, it sounds like torture. Most Yancey field trips were. But Mr. Brunner, our Latin teacher, was leading this trip, so I had hopes. Mr. Brunner was this middle-aged guy in a motorized wheelchair. He had thinning hair and a scruffy beard and a frayed tweed jacket, which always smelled like coffee. You wouldn't think he'd be cool, but he told stories and jokes and let us play games in class. He also owned this awesome collection of Roman armor and weapons. So he was the only teacher whose class didn't put me to sleep. I hoped the trip would be okay. At least I hoped that for once I wouldn't get in trouble. Boy, was I wrong. See, bad thing happened to me on field trip. Like at my 5th grade school when we went to Saratoga battlefield. I had this accident with a Revolutionary War cannon. I wasn't aiming for the school bus, but of course I got expelled anyway. And before that, at my 4th grade school, when we took a behind-the-scenes tour of the Marine War shark pool, I sort of hit the wrong lever of the catwalk and our class took an unplanned swim. And the time before that, well, you get the idea. This trip, I was determined to be good. All the way into the city, I put up with Nancy Boba Fett, the freckly, red-haired kleptomaniac girl, hitting my best friend Grover in the back of the head with chunks of peanut butter and ketchup sandwich. Grover was an easy target. He was scrawny. He cried when he got frustrated. He must have been held back several grades because he was the only 6th grader with acne and start of a wispy beard on his chin. On top of that, he was crippled. He had a note excusing him from PE for the rest of his life because he had some kind of muscular disease on his legs. It walked funny like every step hurt him, but don't let that fool you. You should have seen him run when he was enchilada day in the cafeteria. Anyway, Nancy Bofield was throwing ones of sandwich that stuck in his curly brown hair, and she knew I couldn't do anything back to her because I was already on probation. The headmaster had threatened me with death by school suspensions suspension if anything bad, embarrassing, or even mildly entertaining happened on this trip. I'm going to kill her, I mumbled. Grover tried to calm me down. It's okay. I like peanut butter. He dodged another piece of Nancy's lunch. That's it. I started to get up, but Grover pulled me back to my seat. You're already on probation, he reminded me. You know who'll get blamed if anything happens. Looking back on it, I wish I'd tagged Nancy Buffett right then and there, and school suspension would have been nothing compared to the mess I was about to get myself into. Mr. Brunner led the museum tour. He rode up front in his wheelchair, guiding us through the big eco galleries, past marble statues and glass cases full of really old black and ruined pottery. It blew my mind that this stuff had survived for 2,000, 3,000 years. He gathered us around a 13-foot tall stone column with a big sphinx at the top and started telling us how it was a grave marker, a steal for a girl about her age. He told us about the carvings on the sides. I was trying to listen to what he had to say because it was kind of interesting, but everybody around me was talking, and every time I told him to shut up, the other teacher chaperone, Mrs. Dodds, would give me the evil eye. Mrs. Dodds was this little math teacher from Georgia who wore a black leather jacket, even though she was 50 years old. She looked mean enough to ride a Harley right into your locker. She had come to Yancy halfway through the year when her last math teacher had a nervous breakdown. From her first day, Mrs. Dodd loved Nancy Bubblefield and figured I was devil's spawn. She would point her crooked finger at me and say, "Now, honey," with a sweat, and I knew I was going to get after-school detention for a month. One time, after she'd made me erase all answers out of all math workbook until midnight, I told Grover I didn't think Mrs. Dodds was human. He looked at me, real serious, and said, "You're absolutely right." Mr. Brunner kept talking about great general art. Finally, Nancy Bubblefield snickered something about the naked guy on the steel, and I turned around and said, "Will you shut up?" It came out louder than I meant to. The whole group laughed, and Mr. Brunner stopped his story. "Mr. Jackson," he said, "did you have a comment?" My face was totally red. I said, "No, sir." Mr. Brunner pointed to one of the pictures on the steel. "Perhaps you'll tell us what this picture represents?" I looked at the carving and felt a flush of relief because I actually recognized it. "That's Kronos eating his kids, right?" "Yes," Mr. Brunner said, obviously not satisfied. "And I did this because, well, I racked my brain to remember. Kronos was the king god and god?" Mr. Brunner asked. "Titan," I corrected myself. "And he didn't trust his kids, who were the gods. So, Kronos ate them up, right? But his wife had baby blues and gave Kronos a rock to eat inside, and later when Zeus grew up, he tricked his dad, Kronos, into barfing up his brothers and sisters." "Ew," said one of the girls behind me. "And so there was this big fight between the gods and the titans," I continued, "and the gods won." Some snickers from the group. Behind me, Nancy Bubblefield mumbled to a friend, "Like we're going to use this in real life. Like it's going to say on our job application, please explain why Kronos hate this kid." "And why, Mr. Jackson?" Brown said. To paraphrase Mr. Buffett's excellent question, does this matter in real life? "Busted," Grover muttered. "Shut up," Nancy hissed, her face even brighter red than her hair. At least Nancy got back to Mr. Brennan was the only one who ever caught her saying anything wrong. He had rather ears. I thought about his question and shrugged. "I don't know, sir." "I see." Mr. Brennan looked disappointed. Well, have credit, Mr. Jackson. This did indeed feed Cronus a mixture of mustard and wine, which made him this gorgeous odd five children, who, of course, being immortal gods, had been living and growing up completely undigested in his tightened stomach. The gods defeated their father, slicing him into pieces with his own scythe, and scattered his remains in Tartarus, the darkest part of the underworld. On that happy note, it's time for lunch. Mrs. Dodds will lead us back to outside. The class drifted out, the girls holding their stomachs, the guys pushing each other around and acting like doofuses. Grover and I were about to follow them when Mr. Brunner said, Mr. Jackson. I knew that was coming. I told Grover to keep going. Then I turned towards Mr. Brunner. Sir? Mr. Brunner has this look that wouldn't let you go. Intense brown eyes that could have been 1,000 years old and had seen everything. You must learn to answer my question, Mr. Brunner told me. About the Titans, about real life, how now your studies apply to it. Oh, what you learned from me, he said. It's vitally important. I expect you to treat it as such. I will accept only the best from you, Percy Jackson. I wanted to get angry. The guy pushed me so hard. I mean, sure, it was kind of cool on tournament days when he dressed up in a suit of Roman armor and shouted, "Whoa!" and challenged us, sword point against sword, to run to the board and name every Greek and Roman person who has ever lived, and the mother and what god they worshipped. But Mr. Brenner expected me to be as good as everybody else, despite the fact that I have dyslexia and attention deficit disorder. And I had never made above a C in my life. No, he didn't expect me to be as good. He expected me to be better. And I couldn't learn all those names and facts, much less spell them correctly. I mumbled something about trying harder, while Mr. Brenner took one long sad look at the steel like he'd been at this girl's funeral. He told me to go outside and eat my lunch. The class gathered on the front steps of the museum, where we could watch the foot traffic along Fifth Avenue. Overhead, a huge storm was brewing, with clouds blacker than I'd ever seen over the city. I figured maybe it was global warming or something, because the weather all across New York State had been weird since Christmas. We'd had massive storms, snowstorms, flooding, wildfires from lightning strikes. I wouldn't have been surprised if this was a hurricane blowing on in. Nobody else seemed to notice. Some of the guys were pelting pigeons with Lunchable crackers. Nancy Bubblefield was trying to pickpocket something from an old lady's purse, and of course Mrs. Todd wasn't seeing a thing. Grover and I sat on the edge of the fountain, away from the others. We thought that maybe if we did that, everybody would know we were from that school, the school for loser freaks who couldn't make it elsewhere. Detention? Grover asked. Nah, I said. Not from Mr. Brunner. I just wish he'd laid me off sometimes. I mean, I'm not a genius. Grover didn't say anything for a while. Then, when I thought he was going to give me some deep philosophical comment to make me feel better, he said, Can I have your apple? I didn't have much of an appetite, so I let him take it. I watched the stream of cabs going down Fifth Avenue and thought about my mom's apartment, only a little way uptown from where we sat. I hadn't seen her since Christmas. I wanted so bad to jump to a taxi and head home. She'd hug me and be glad to see me, but she'd be disappointed too. She'd send me right back to Yancey, remind me that I had to try harder, even if this was my sixth school in 6 years, and I was probably going to be kicked out again. I wouldn't be able to stand that sad look she'd give me. Mr. Brunner parked his wheelchair at the base of the handicapped ramp. He had celery while he read a paperback novel. A red umbrella stuck up from the back of his chair, making it look like a motorized coffee table. I was about to unwrap my sandwich when Nancy Bubblefield appeared in front of me with her ugly friends. I guess she'd gotten tired of stealing from the tourists and dumped her half-eaten lunch on Grover's lap. Oops, she grinned at me with her crooked teeth. Her freckles were orange, as if somebody had spray painted her face with liquid Cheetos. I tried to stay cool. The counselor told me a million times, count to 10, get control of your temper, but I was so mad. My wine went black. A wave roared in my ears. I don't remember touching her, but the next thing I knew, Nancy was sitting on her butt in the fountain, screaming, Percy, push me! Mrs. Dodds materialized next to us. Some of the kids were whispering, did you see? The water! Like it grabbed her. I don't know what they were talking about. All I knew was that I was in trouble again. As soon as Mrs. Dodds was sure poor little Nancy was okay, I promising her to get her new shirt at the museum gift shop, etc., etc., Mrs. Dodds turned on me. No, there was a triumphant fire in her eyes, as if I'd done something she'd been waiting for all semester. Now, honey. I know, I grumbled. I'm monitoring workbooks. That wasn't the right thing to say. Come with me, Mrs. Todd said. Wait, Grover yelped. It was me I pushed off. I stared at him, stunned. I couldn't believe he was trying to cover for me. Mrs. Todd scared Grover to death. She glared at him so hard his whiskery chin trembled. I don't think so, Mr. Underwood, she said. But you will stay here. Grover looked at me desperately. It's okay, man, I told him. Thanks for trying. Honey, Mrs. Todd barked at me. No. Nancy Bobofit smirked. I gave her my look I'll kill you later stare. Then I turned to face Mrs. Dodd, but she wasn't there. She was standing at the museum entrance, way out the top of the steps, gesturing impatiently at me to come on. How'd she get here so fast? I have moments like that a lot when my brain falls asleep with something, and the next thing you know, I've missed something, as if a piece fell out of the universe and left me staring at a blank place behind it. The school counselor told me it was part of the ADHD. My brain was interpreting things. I wasn't so sure. I went after Mrs. Dodds. On the way up the steps, I glanced back at Grover. He was looking pale, cutting his eyes between me and Mr. Brunner, like I wanted Mr. Brunner to notice what was going on. But Mr. Brunner was absorbed in his novel. I looked back at Mrs. Dodds. Disappeared again. She was now inside the building, at the end of the entrance hall. Okay, I thought, she's going to make me buy a new shirt for Nancy at the gift shop. But apparently that wasn't the plan. I followed her deeper into the museum. When I finally caught up to her, we were back in the Greek and Roman section. Except for us, the gallery was empty. Mrs. Todd stood with her arms crossed in front of a big marble frieze of the Greek gods. She was making her this weird noise in her throat, like growling. Even without the noise, I would have been nervous. It's weird being alone with the teacher, especially Mrs. Dodds. Something about the way she looked at the frieze as she wanted to pulverize it. You've been giving us problems, honey, she said. I did the same thing I said. Yes, ma'am. She tugged on her cuffs of a leather jacket. Do you really think that you would get away with that? The look at her eye was beyond mad. It was evil. She's a teacher, I thought nervously. It's not like she's going to hurt me. I said, I'll try harder, ma'am. Thunder shook the building. We're not fools, Percy Jackson, Mrs. Todd said. It was only a matter of time before we found you out, confessing you will suffer less pain. I did not know what she was talking about. All I could think was that the teachers must have found the latent stash of candy I'd been selling out in my dorm room Or maybe they realized I got my essay on Tom Sawyer from the internet without ever reading the book, and now they were going to take away my grade, or worse, they were going to make me read the book. Well, she demanded. Ma'am, I don't. Your time is up, she hissed. Then the weirdest thing happened. Her eyes began to glow like barbecue coals, her fingers stretched, turning into talons. Her jacket melted into large, leathery wings. She wasn't human. She was a shriveled hag with a bat wings and claws and a mouthful of yellow fangs, and she was about to slice me to ribbon. Some things got even stranger. Mr. Brunner, who had been out in the front museum a minute before, was staring into the doorway of the gallery, holding a pen in his hand. What ho, Percy! He shouted, and tossed the pen in the air. Mrs. Dodds lunged at me. With a yelp, I ducked and felt talons lash the air next to my ear. I snapped the ballpoint pen after her, but when it hit my head, it wasn't a pen anymore. It was a sword. Mr. Brunner's bronze sword, which he always used on tournament days. Mrs. Dodds spun towards me with a massacre look in her eyes. My knees were jelly, my hands were shaking so bad, I almost dropped the sword. She snarled, "Die, honey!" and she flew straight at me. Absolute terror ran through my body. The only thing that came natural. I swung the sword. The his metal blade hit her shoulder and pressed clean through her body, and as if she were made of water. Yes! Mrs. Dodd put a sandcase castle in a powder fun. She exploded into yellow powder, vaporized into the spot, leaving nothing but a smell of fertile and a dying screech and a chill of evil in the air, as if those two glowing red eyes were still watching me. I was alone. Then there was a ballpoint pen in my head. Mr. Brown wasn't there. Nobody was there but me. My hands were still trembling. My lunch must have been contaminated with magic mushroom or something. Had I imagined the whole thing? I went back outside. It started to rain. River was sitting by the fountain. A museum map tented over his head. Nancy Bobbafit was still standing there, stuck from her swim in the fountain, rumbling to her ugly friends. When she saw me, she said, "I hope Mrs. Kerr ripped your butt." I said, "Who?" "Our teacher. I blinked. There was no teacher named Mrs. Kerr. I asked Nancy what she was talking about. She rolled her eyes and turned away. I guess Grover was Mrs. Dodd was. He said, "Who?" But he paused first, and he wouldn't look at me, so I thought he was messing with me. "Not funny, man," I told him. "This is serious." Thunder boomed overhead. I saw Mr. Brunner sitting under his red umbrella, rereading his book as if he never moved. I went over him. He looked up a little distracted. That would be my pen. "Please bring your own writing utensil in the future, Mr. Jackson." I handed Mr. Brunner his pen. I didn't even realize I was still holding it. "So," I said, "where is Mrs. Dodds?" He stared at me blankly. "Who?" "Your chaperone, Mrs. Dodds, the pre-algebra teacher." He frowned at me and sat forward, looking mildly concerned. "Percy, there is no Mrs. Dodds on this trip. As far as I know, there has never been a Mrs. Dodds at Yancey Academy. Are you feeling all right?" Ta-da. So that was it. That was the first chapter of Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief. Yeah. This is where, obviously, the chapter and things start to get really interesting. But I'll leave you to it to read the rest of the book. Or find an audiobook and listen to it. I don't know. You do you. So I hope you liked this video. I hope you liked my voice, I guess. Yeah. Good night. Sleep tight.